My wife invited me to a very important business dinner with a potential Japanese partner. She looked at me in that way that's both an invitation and an order. I smiled, nodded, and simply resigned myself to playing the part of the proper husband who accompanies and doesn't get in the way. I'd been playing that role for so many years that I didn't even need to rehearse anymore. What she didn't know, what no one in our life knew, was that I understood every single word being spoken in Japanese. And when I heard what she said to that client about me, when I heard how she described me with an almost clinical coldness in a language she thought I couldn't comprehend, everything changed forever. But let me start at the beginning, because nothing that happened that night came out of nowhere. It was all the result of many years of small surrenders, silences, and decisions I had allowed others to make for me. Before I go on, if you like these kinds of real stories full of strong emotions and tough decisions, I invite you to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and write in the comments if you've ever felt invisible in your own relationship. It helps me a lot to keep sharing stories like this with you. My name is Michael, and for 12 years I thought I had a good marriage. Not perfect, but good enough not to question it too much. I worked as a senior manager at a very prestigious tech company, the kind of job you can't explain in a single sentence at family gatherings, which everyone just summarizes with a simple, "He's doing well." Emily, my wife, was a marketing coordinator at a smaller but quite dynamic company. Nothing glamorous if you looked at it from the outside, but she liked the feeling of being in motion, of having campaigns, events, launches. We lived in a comfortable townhouse in a suburban development, with always trimmed hedges and neighbors who greeted you politely without ever becoming real friends. We took a vacation once a year, almost always to places that looked good in photos, and from the outside we probably gave the impression of having life pretty much figured out. What no one saw were the fine, almost invisible cracks accumulating beneath that polished surface. When we got married, Emily was a different version of herself. Or maybe I saw her with different eyes, I don't know. I remember the first nights in our small rented apartment before the townhouse, when we'd eat cheap pasta on mismatched plates and she'd sit on the floor with her legs crossed, listening to me talk about my projects. Back then, she seemed interested in everything. The technical decisions no one outside my world understood, the inside jokes from the office, my fears about not being good enough. She, in turn, would tell me about her ideas for campaigns, how one day she would be a marketing director, how she wasn't born to be just another face in the crowd. I would look at her and truly believe that we would move forward together, each shining in our own sphere, supporting each other. We were poor in material terms, but rich in expectations. At some point, however, things started to change. I couldn't pinpoint exactly when it all began, because it wasn't an earthquake, but a slow erosion. Maybe it was when I got promoted about 3 years ago, or maybe even before that, when I started bringing home more exhaustion and less presence. Maybe it was when she started meeting more interesting people, her exact words, at conferences and events. The fact is, almost without realizing it, I found myself living in a different marriage than the one I thought I had. Emily became more irritable, more critical, always comparing our life to that of other couples who, according to her, traveled more, went out more, were doing big things. I worked late, traveled for conferences, was glued to emails and video calls, and when I got home, I'd find her glued to her phone, scrolling through social media with a slight frown, or too absorbed in her own world to talk about anything other than obligations. Our conversations became transactional. Did you pay the mortgage? Don't forget we have dinner with the Millers on Saturday. Can you take the car to the shop? I don't have time. Occasionally, I tried to bring up a different topic, to talk about how I was feeling, how disconnected I felt, but the responses were usually quick, practical, eager to get back to the stream of phone notifications or work email. There were days when I felt like I was talking to a manager, not my wife. I told myself this was normal, that this is what marriage is like after a decade, that passion fades, routine sets in, and you just make it work, that real life doesn't look like the movies or the stories people tell on social media. I crushed that feeling of loneliness that crept in during the silent nights while I was checking emails in my home office and she was in the living room watching TV shows that didn't interest me, laughing alone at comments I no longer understood because I didn't follow that content. For a long time, I thought that emptiness was part of the price of a stable life, and that the only thing I could do was get used to it, like someone gets used to a constant hum from an old machine, annoying, but always on. I remember one night in particular, one of those that I now see clearly as an early warning sign. We had gone out to dinner with another couple, her colleagues from work. He was a creative, she worked in events. The entire evening revolved around campaigns, influencers, budgets, difficult clients. At one point he asked me, "So Michael, what is it you do exactly?" I opened my mouth to explain in the simplest way possible what I did at my company, but Emily cut in. "Michael's a senior manager at a big company. He handles systems stuff, numbers, servers, that technical stuff," she said, making a gesture with her hand as if brushing aside a minor detail. "He's very good at what he does, very stable. I always say, he's my rock." Everyone smiled. It sounded nice, but inside I felt a strange pang. It wasn't what she said, but how she said it, as if my career was something flat, boring, useful only as a foundation for her to build something more glamorous on top of. It was a fleeting sensation, something I quickly dismissed, telling myself I was being too sensitive. Over time, that same feeling became harder and harder to ignore. About 18 months ago, I stumbled upon something that completely changed my path, although at the time I had no idea to what extent. I was scrolling through my phone on a sleepless night in an airport hotel after a delayed flight. It was one of those impersonal rooms with identical carpets in different cities where the silence feels hollow. I had eaten dinner alone, staring blankly at the news on TV, and then went to bed without being tired. Between work emails and ads, one popped up for a free trial of a language learning app. The featured course was Japanese, and suddenly, as if someone had turned on a light in a forgotten room, I remembered something about myself that had been buried for years. In college, I had taken a semester of Japanese when I was a different person, with different dreams and less fear of wasting time on impractical things. I had been fascinated by the writing, the different logic, the way some words contain nuances that English didn't have. I liked the feeling of looking at the world from a slightly different angle. But then came the serious job, the bills, marriage, the idea of being responsible. And that dream ended up filed away in the mental drawer of nice but useless interests. That night, lying in the hotel bed, with the air conditioning humming and a thick loneliness clinging to my chest, I downloaded the app out of curiosity just to see if I remembered anything. I remembered much more than I thought. The hiragana came back almost on its own, as if it had been waiting patiently in a corner of my memory. Then the katakana, then single words, short phrases that had made me smile years ago. Within a few weeks I was hooked. Every evening after work, instead of staying late doing pointless overtime just to avoid going home to a shared silence, I would go home, have a quick dinner, and lock myself in my office with headphones on, doing lessons like a disciplined teenager. I subscribed to a podcast for students. I started watching Japanese dramas with subtitles and later without them. I downloaded a dictionary, bought a couple of books online. The clock ticked by without me noticing. I didn't tell Emily, not because I was hiding a crime, but because I had already learned not to share things she would ridicule or minimize. 3 years earlier, for example, I had mentioned that I wanted to take a woodworking course as a hobby, something manual to disconnect from the screen, to feel like I was making something I could touch with my hands. We were having breakfast. She was looking at her phone, and I was reading the news. And I suddenly said, "I saw a woodworking workshop near the office. I was thinking of signing up for a couple of evenings a week." She looked up, not angry, but with a mix of surprise and amusement. "Michael, you have enough on your plate with your office and your meetings. Now you want to be a craftsman." She laughed. "Don't be ridiculous. Besides, when would you supposedly have the time?" The conversation died there. I tried to justify it, to explain that it wasn't for financial need but for pleasure, but it had already been sentenced as a ridiculous whim. After that, I learned to keep my interests to myself. It was easier than having to defend them over and over and ending up feeling childish. So Japanese became my secret, my private world. And it turned out I was good at it, really good. I practiced every day, sometimes 2 or 3 hours, like an addict to something that for the first time in a long time made me feel alive. I started with private tutors online. The first time I clicked on the video call and saw a Japanese teacher on the other side, smiling, greeting me in a language I had unknowingly yearned for, I felt a mix of embarrassment and excitement. "Konnichiwa, Michael-san," she said, and the sound of my name in Japanese seemed magical. I made mistakes. Lots of them. I got tangled up with particles, confused verb tenses, mixed up vocabulary, but every small step forward was a personal victory. I joined study groups, forums where people shared tips, books, inside jokes. I started reading simple novels for Japanese teenagers. At first, they were a mountain, then a demanding slope, finally a challenging but possible walk. After a year, I could understand Japanese conversations with considerable fluency. It wasn't perfect, of course, but it was enough to follow simple movies, understand intermediate-level podcasts, and hold decent conversations with my teachers. I felt like I was recovering a part of myself that I had buried under layers of responsibility and complacency. Every new word I learned, every grammatical structure I mastered, was silent proof that I was still capable of growth, that I was still someone beyond the one who brings home the paycheck or Emily's husband. It was like opening a window in a house I thought had been sealed for years and letting in fresh air for the first time, an air that also had a different alphabet. While my inner world expanded, my daily life continued to shrink. Emily was increasingly absorbed in her work, her contacts, her strategic dinners. She started talking about networking as if it were a second religion. Our weekends filled up with events I attended more out of obligation than pleasure, pretending to be interested in conversations about clients I didn't know and brands I didn't care about. She, on the other hand, seemed to shine in that environment, and the more she shone outside, the less light she brought home. One evening, in late September, I got home a little earlier than usual. I had managed to escape a meeting that threatened to go on forever, using the excuse of a report I supposedly had to review at home. I took off my jacket, left my keys in the bowl by the entrance, and went into the kitchen to fix myself a quick dinner. I was getting a plate when Emily walked in almost behind me with an energy I hadn't seen in her for months, with that sparkle in her eyes she used to reserve for our good news. "Michael, I have great news," she said, dropping her purse on the table with a soft thud. "We're about to close a partnership with a Japanese tech company. It could be huge for us. The CEO is coming next week, and my boss has asked me to take him to a very exclusive Japanese restaurant." "You have to go to a business dinner?" I asked, opening the fridge more out of habit than hunger. "Yes. Mr. Tanaka specifically asked if I was married. Japanese business culture," she added as if giving a lecture. "They like to know you're stable, family-oriented. It gives a good impression." She grabbed a bottle of water, took a long drink and added, already pacing around the kitchen as if rehearsing the scene, "You just need to be well-dressed, smile, be pleasant. You know, the usual." Something in the way she said, "the usual," pricked me inside, like a fine needle that doesn't kill but annoys. I brushed it aside with the practiced ease of someone who has been downplaying those pricks for years. Sure, of course. When is it? Next Thursday at 7 p.m. Wear that navy blue suit, the one with the white shirt, conservative but elegant. And then Emily finally looked at me directly, sizing me up. Tanaka doesn't speak much English. I'll be doing most of the talking in Japanese. You'll probably be a bit bored, but just relax. Order some food and smile, okay? My heart started racing in a way she couldn't interpret. You speak Japanese? I asked, trying to make the question sound casual. I've been learning it working with our Tokyo office over the years, she replied with pride, straightening her shoulders. I can hold my own pretty well now. It's one of the reasons they're considering me for a major promotion. Not many people in my field can negotiate in Japanese. She didn't ask if I spoke it, nor did it cross her mind that I might have any interest or knowledge. Why would it? In her mind, I was the busy executive who only operated in English and numbers, the husband who would show up in the photo to demonstrate stability. I'd looked back into the fridge, my mind already elsewhere. Sounds great, honey, I'll be there. When she left the kitchen, I stood by the counter, the fridge door still open, the cold air hitting my face. An opportunity had just fallen from the sky. An opportunity to listen to a conversation Emily considered private, to hear how she really spoke, how she presented herself, how she described our life when she thought I couldn't understand. A part of me felt dirty for even thinking of taking advantage of it, but another, larger part, the part that felt increasingly invisible in its own marriage, the one that had learned to live in silence, wanted to know. I needed to know who I was in her story, when I wasn't present, or when, like now. I was sitting right next to her as if I were deaf. That week felt endless. During the day I worked, attended meetings, answered emails as usual, but as soon as I had a free moment, I'd pull out my phone and review Japanese business vocabulary, expressions of courtesy, formulas for apology and gratitude. I mentally practiced complex structures while waiting for the elevator or while coffee dripped into the machine. At home, I'd lock myself in my office with the excuse of finishing reports. But in reality, I was listening to business podcasts in Japanese, paying attention to the set phrases that might come up in conversation. I didn't know exactly what I expected to hear. Maybe nothing important. Maybe just banal comments. Maybe I was overreacting, being paranoid, looking for trouble where there was none. Still, something inside me, that intuition you learn to silence, but which never completely dies, insisted that this dinner was going to show me something I didn't want to see, but could no longer afford to ignore. Thursday arrived. I woke up before the alarm went off. While Emily slept soundly, I looked at her face on the pillow, her mouth slightly parted, her forehead relaxed. She was the same woman I had laughed with in that small apartment, the same one who had kissed me excitedly when she got her first promotion. And yet, she was different. I don't know when the metamorphosis had occurred, but there was the result. I showered, shaved with almost mechanical care, put on the navy blue suit she had requested, paired it with polished shoes and a discreet watch. I looked in the mirror and saw exactly what Emily wanted Mr. Tanaka to see. A presentable husband who wouldn't embarrass her in front of an important client, someone who projected stability and success, a well-dressed supporting character. The restaurant was in an expensive part of downtown, in a glass and steel building with a doorman at the entrance. It was modern and incredibly expensive, one of those places with a months-long waiting list, where the lights are dim. The tables are spaced far enough apart for discretion to seem like another luxury, and the background music is so soft you barely notice it. Emily had gotten the reservation through a company contact. She walked confidently down the hallway, as if she belonged there. We arrived 15 minutes early. She checked her reflection in her phone's camera, touched up her makeup, smoothed down a jacket that was already perfectly straight, and muttered without looking away from her reflection, "Remember, be pleasant. Don't try to get into the business side of things. If Mr. Tanaka speaks to you in English, keep your answers short. We need him to focus on the partnership, not get distracted with stories." I nodded, swallowing the bitter taste rising in my throat. That familiar taste from the times when my role was reduced to not getting in the way. Mr. Tanaka was already seated when we arrived. A man in his late 50s with silver-rimmed glasses and an impeccably tailored suit. His hands rested on the table with a calm that commanded respect. When he saw us, he stood up immediately. Emily gave a slight bow. I imitated her, remembering my lessons on Japanese etiquette. They exchanged formal, respectful greetings in Japanese, with those phrases I had repeated so many times in front of my computer screen. I listened to every word, feeling a strange mix of secret pride and nerves. I smiled with the look of someone a bit lost, and sat in the chair Emily had indicated, as if I were just another guest in her carefully staged scene. The conversation started in English, superficial pleasantries, comments about the restaurant, the hotel, the city, questions about whether it was our first time hosting international partners. Mr. Tanaka's English was quite good, better than Emily had implied, with just a slight accent. I chimed in just enough, answering when they looked at me, making a light joke when it seemed appropriate. Tanaka smiled a couple of times with that restrained smile typical of someone in professional mode. Emily, meanwhile, guided the conversation like a self-assured conductor. When they brought the menus, with Japanese calligraphy and discreet translations, they naturally switched to Japanese. It was almost imperceptible. A sentence in English, another half in Japanese, and suddenly everything was in Japanese. Emily's fluency was good, though from my position as a trained listener, I caught errors and hesitations that she compensated for with confidence, smiling, using her tone and body language to cover the stumbles. They discussed business projections, expansion strategies, marketing and positioning details. I didn't understand everything, but enough to follow the general thread. I sat still, sipping water, smiling occasionally when they looked at me, playing my part as the distracted companion. Inside, however, I was as alert as an animal in the forest. Then Mr. Tanaka turned slightly towards me and said something in Japanese that I caught clearly. A polite question about what I did for a living, if I also worked in technology and in what area. I managed to open my mouth to answer, feeling a pang of temptation to reveal my secret. But Emily answered for me before I could even take a breath. In Japanese, she said, "Michael works at a large tech company, but in a pretty standard position. He's not one of the key decision makers. He's a very good guy, very stable, but he settles for little. He likes things safe. I'm the one who takes risks, the one who pushes." I kept my face neutral, my smile polite, but inside, something twisted violently. A pretty standard position. I had been leading teams for years, closing complex projects, managing budgets she had never bothered to ask me about, and she had just reduced all of it to someone who settles for little, as if I were a mediocre employee with a good personality. Tanaka nodded courteously, making a comment about the importance of stable people in any organization, and didn't ask further. I brought the water glass to my lips to have something to do with my hands. The dinner continued. Several dishes arrived, all impeccably presented. Small mounds of color and texture, each almost a work of art. I ate slowly, more out of inertia than appetite, and I listened, truly listened. Emily was different in Japanese. More aggressive, more boastful, she exaggerated her role in some achievements, took credit for ideas that clearly came from her team. She painted herself as the strategic mind behind almost everything. It wasn't an outright lie, but an inflated version of the woman I knew. I heard her say she had saved an entire campaign with a single brilliant idea. When I had seen her crying on the sofa because nothing was working until a colleague proposed the change that fixed everything. Now that colleague was a detail erased from her narrative. Then the conversation changed tone. Mr. Tanaka mentioned the work-life balance, the importance of family support in demanding careers. He made a reference to his own wife and how she had supported him for years, and he asked quite directly how Emily managed that pressure at home. She let out a laugh that churned my stomach, a laugh that sounded more cynical than amused. "To be honest," she said in Japanese, "my husband doesn't really understand real ambition. He's a good worker, but he lacks vision. I handle all the important decisions, the finances, the planning for our future. Michael is more of a go-with-the-flow kind of person. It's useful to have him as an image of stability. It gives the impression of a serious family, a responsible husband. It works out for me, so I don't have to worry about a husband who wants to shine too brightly or compete with me." I gripped the water glass so tightly I thought it would break. I felt a heat rise from my stomach to my face. But years of training to be the calm one, the one who didn't make scenes, kept me in my seat. Tanaka made a neutral sound, a sort of polite, "I see." I looked at his face and saw a flicker of something, maybe discomfort, maybe disapproval, but he didn't confront her. Instead, he changed the subject and asked Emily about her long-term goals, where she saw herself in 5 or 10 years. "I'm aiming for a director-level position in about 5 years, Emily continued in Japanese with the same inflated confidence. "I've been positioning myself carefully, building the right relationships. My husband doesn't know this yet, but I've been moving some assets around for a while, opening offshore accounts, just smart financial planning. If my career requires relocations or big changes, I need the flexibility to move quickly without being tied to joint accounts or his opinion on everything." I felt my blood run cold. Offshore accounts, moving money without telling me. It sounded less like smart planning and more like preparing for a future where I would have no access to anything I thought was ours. But she wasn't finished. Mr. Tanaka asked something about the stress of the position, if she had any way of managing it, any hobbies or activities that helped her disconnect. Emily's laugh this time was downright unpleasant. "I have my release valves," she said. "There's someone at work, Paul. He's from the finance department. We've been seeing each other for about 6 months. My husband doesn't suspect a thing. Honestly, it's been great for me. Paul understands my ambitions, how the game is played. We talk strategy. We make plans. It's a breath of fresh air after coming home to someone who lives happily in his routine, thinking only about his job and simple things like, what game is on TV? I remained completely still. If someone had stopped time at that moment, they would have found me turned to stone. My face felt rigid, as if it weren't my own, while inside something crumbled with a silent crash. An affair. Offshore accounts, minimizing my career, painting me as a man without ambition, an accessory for a good image. 12 years of marriage. And this is how she talked about me when she thought I couldn't understand. Mr. Tanaka was clearly uncomfortable now. I could see it in the way he shifted in his chair, in how he redirected the conversation to neutral topics, in the slight tension in his jaw. He was too polite to confront Emily directly, but his responses became shorter, colder. I barely touched the last few dishes. The flavors that under any other circumstances would have seemed delicate and interesting now reached a mouth incapable of tasting anything. The dinner finally ended. We said our goodbyes in the restaurant lobby under a light that was too white. Mr. Tanaka gave a brief bow towards me and said in careful English, "It was a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Michael. I wish you the best." Oh, there was a softness in his eyes that made me wonder if he had understood more than he let on, if Emily's words had unsettled him as much as they had me. I think, deep down, we both knew that night had stopped being just a business dinner. The ride home was silent. Emily seemed pleased with herself, humming along to the radio, making a casual comment about the wine or the dessert, as if nothing particularly delicate had come out of her mouth. At a red light, she looked in the sun visor mirror and touched up her lipstick. "It went well," she finally said. "I think we're going to close the deal." Mr. Tanaka was impressed. "I'm very happy for you," I replied, my voice sounding empty even to me, as if it were coming from far away. I looked out the window at the city lights, the buildings, the shadows of people crossing the streets, unaware that inside that car, in silence, a marriage was collapsing. At home, Emily gave me a distracted kiss on the cheek. She said she had emails to catch up on and disappeared into her office. She closed the door, as always. I went up to the bedroom, turned on the light and stood in the middle of the silence, not quite sure what to do with my body. I looked at myself in the closet mirror and saw a well-dressed, apparently successful man with the glazed eyes of someone who had just seen the final cut projected on a screen, and it looked nothing like the trailer they'd been sold. I sat on the bed, took out my phone, held it for a moment in my hands, and then I did something I had never imagined I would do. I called Sarah. Sarah had been my college roommate, my best friend during those years when I still believed anything was possible. We would spend entire nights studying, laughing, sharing cheap pizzas and secrets. She had seen me cry through my first serious breakup. I had been there for her when her father died. Then life, distance, and yes, the subtle way Emily discouraged my friendships had pulled us apart. Sarah had ironically become a family lawyer and had gone through her own divorce 5 years earlier. We had recently reconnected on social media, exchanged a few messages, "we should catch up sometime," but I hadn't told her anything real about my life. Not until that night. She answered on the second ring. Surprised by the hour, it was almost 11 p.m. "Michael," she said, with that mix of joy and alarm you have when a friend from the past calls late. I swallowed hard. "I need a lawyer," I said, and my voice broke on the last word. We talked for 2 hours. I'm not exaggerating. I lay on the bed in the dim room and told her everything. The dinner, the conversation in Japanese, the offshore accounts, the 6-month affair with Paul, the years of feeling minimized and used as a prop for stability. As I spoke, I was giving shape to things that until then had only been vague feelings, and by naming them, they became more real, more undeniable. Sarah listened without interrupting much. Occasionally she would just say, "Uh-huh," or ask for a specific detail, but you could tell her mind was working at full speed, trained for these kinds of stories, though this time it hurt more because the protagonist was someone she cared about. When I finished, there were a few seconds of silence on the other end. "The first thing I need you to do is breathe," she said finally. "Can you do that for me?" I breathed, took a deep breath, let it out slowly. "Second, you need to understand that what she's doing with those offshore accounts could be illegal. It is certainly highly unethical if she's hiding marital assets in anticipation of a divorce or simply to control everything. That's financial fraud. We can use that to your advantage." "I don't have any proof," I whispered. "It was just a conversation. I didn't record anything. I was too busy trying to process what I was hearing." "That's okay," she replied in a firm tone that reminded me why I had always trusted her. "Here's what we're going to do. Don't confront her yet. I know you want to, that you're burning with the need to scream everything you know in her face, but we have to be strategic. Starting tomorrow, you're going to start gathering documentation, bank statements, tax returns, any financial records you have access to. Take pictures, forward emails to yourself, whatever it takes. If she's moving money, there will be a trail. We'll find it." "Sarah, I'm scared," I admitted. Not just scared of losing the marriage, which was already lost. but scared of discovering everything that lay beneath the surface. "I know," she said, "but I also know that you're smart and capable, and you just proved it by learning an entire language without her knowing. You are not the complacent man she described. You can handle this, and you're not alone. From this moment on, whatever happens, we'll handle it together. Understood?" When we hung up, I stared at the ceiling for a while in the dark. Then I sat on the edge of the bed and finally let everything I had been holding back in the restaurant hit me. Rage, betrayal, pain, fear. I cried in silence, my fists clenched on my knees, feeling a mix of humiliation and relief. But underneath all that, something else began to grow, a cold, clear determination. I was not going to continue being the useful husband, just an accessory for stability. I was not going to continue allowing myself to be diminished and deceived in my own home. I was going to take back control of my life, even if it meant burning down everything I had built up to that point. I felt that for the first time in a long time, I wasn't the one waiting for Emily to decide the next move, but the one who was going to decide it himself. The next morning, I called in to work, saying I would be working from home because I wasn't feeling well. I had enough credit and trust built up that there were no awkward questions. Emily barely noticed, muttered something about an important meeting, and left for the office with her coffee in one hand, her phone glued to the other. From the window, I watched her get into her car, adjust the rearview mirror, check her makeup and drive off, never imagining that as she pulled away, the life she had carefully constructed was beginning to crumble where she least expected it, in her own drawers. As soon as her car disappeared around the corner, I started searching. Emily kept files in her small desk in the living room, a piece of furniture that had always seemed chaotic to me, but actually had its own logic. Half-opened envelopes, folders with partial labels, sticky notes with abbreviations only she understood. I opened drawers with my heart pounding in my throat, feeling like I was crossing a line, but remembering Sarah's voice. "You're protecting yourself. This isn't a gratuitous invasion, it's self-defense." I found bank statements from the last 3 years, joint tax returns, information on investment accounts. I photographed everything with my phone and uploaded it to a private cloud folder that Sarah had created for me that same night, sending me the link with a brief message. "We store everything here, step by step." And there they were, 2 accounts I had never seen before, with names of banks that weren't on our usual list. Regular transfers, amounts that weren't huge at once, but added up to a dizzying sum. $50,000 had moved in the last 8 months to a bank in the Cayman Islands. Our joint savings account had been slowly drained, not all at once, but in small bites designed not to arouse suspicion in someone who wasn't looking closely. Someone like me who trusted. I felt nauseous. I had to lean on the desk for a moment to keep my balance, but I kept photographing, kept documenting. Sarah had told me to be meticulous, so I was. I also found printed and filed emails, correspondence about a small investment property I didn't know existed, or rather that she owned. A beach apartment purchased through a corporation I had never heard of. Everything was in her name. Mine was conspicuously absent, as if I had never existed on that plane. And then I found the emails addressed to Paul. Emily had been careless, or perhaps too confident. She had printed some exchanges, probably to review figures or dates, and had left them in a blue folder with no clear label. I started reading, thinking they were work documents, but the first lines left me cold. Romantic messages, intimate comments about nights in work hotels, private jokes about how naive I was, plans for a future in which I clearly did not appear. In one of them, written a few days before the dinner with Tanaka, it read, "As soon as I resolve the Michael problem, we can stop hiding. I just need a little more time to get all the pieces in place." The Michael problem. That's what I had become. An administrative issue that needed to be resolved for her ideal life to work. I saved every one of those emails as if they were pieces of a gruesome puzzle. I spent 6 weeks silently gathering evidence, living with a woman I now saw with absolute clarity, and who, yet, continued to sleep in my bed, eat at my table, and talk to me as if nothing was wrong. Those days were the longest and strangest of my life. I would get up, have breakfast with her, listen to her complain about the traffic, her boss, some colleague, how much she had to fight to get what she deserved. Sometimes she would mention Paul in passing as the guy from finance who's driving us crazy, and I would nod, feeling like my face was a well-fixed mask. I worked, attended meetings, and every so often I'd slip into the bathroom to check messages from Sarah, who was organizing the information, building the case with the precision of someone who had seen too many versions of the same story. We met twice a week at her office. I would arrive with a folder or with my phone full of new photos. She would greet me with coffee and an expression that mixed professionalism and affection. Her office was a small place, full of papers, diplomas on the wall, shelves with law books, and a half-dead plant in the corner. The contrast with my sterile office full of screens and charts was stark. There, sitting across from her, I felt less like a manager and more like a naked human being. We reviewed every document, every email, every suspicious transaction. "Here," Sarah would say, underlining a date. She starts emptying the savings account, and it coincides with purchases that don't appear in your normal planning. "This email from Paul," she would add later, "is pure gold. He's admitting knowledge of the money transfers. That gets him in trouble too, but most importantly, it proves none of this was an accident." "Do you realize she had it all planned out?" I would ask sometimes, with a mix of astonishment and horror. "Yes," she would reply, looking me straight in the eye, "and that's precisely why we're going to do this right. This isn't about empty revenge. Michael, it's justice. You're reclaiming what's yours and setting boundaries with someone who never thought you were capable of it." Meanwhile, at home, Emily seemed to be living in a parallel reality. She kept talking about her potential promotion, the partnership with the Japanese company, the steps she was taking to secure our future. Sometimes she was even more affectionate than before, as if she sensed something, or as if, knowing she would soon execute her plan, she could afford a kind of anticipatory nostalgia. I watched her with a mixture of sadness and detachment. I stopped wondering when she had stopped loving me and started to accept that I was simply no longer part of her equation. "Are you sure you want to go this far?" And Sarah asked me in one of our meetings when we had the case built. "The thing with her company is going to be like a bomb. She could be left with nothing, at least for a while." I thought about the dinner, her words, the Michael problem, the casual way she talked about hiding money. "She was already planning to leave me with nothing," I replied. "She literally said it. She's been preparing for this for a long time. I'm just getting ahead of her." Sarah nodded slowly. "All right, then we'll do it right." We chose a Friday. Sarah filed the divorce petition on Thursday afternoon, just before the courts closed. On Friday morning, I dressed as if for work, tie perfectly knotted, briefcase in hand. But instead of heading to my office, I went to Sarah's. At 9 a.m. sharp, the HR department of Emily's company would receive a dossier with all the evidence: the money transfers, the offshore accounts, the emails with Paul, all organized with relentless precision. At 9:30 a.m., a court official would serve her the divorce papers at her office. I imagined the scene, unwillingly, her opening an envelope with a frown, reading my name on paper she never expected. I sat in Sarah's conference room, a long table, a window letting in pale light, a coffee maker in the corner. I had a cup of coffee in front of me that I couldn't taste. I checked the clock every 2 minutes, got up, sat back down. At one point, I took out my phone to distract myself and saw a notification, a message from Emily, Something about a dinner we had on Saturday with some friends. I left it unread. A few minutes later, I turned the phone off completely. I didn't want to see her calls or her messages when she found out what was happening. At 11 a.m., Sarah walked into the room with her laptop. "It's done," she said. "Papers served, evidence received. They've placed her on immediate suspension while they investigate. My contact in HR just wrote to me." She sat across from me. "How are you feeling?" I took a deep breath. I placed my hands on the table to feel something solid. "Terrified," I admitted, "but at peace. Like I'm finally doing something right for myself." That night, I stayed at Sarah's house. She had a guest room painted in a light color, with a queen-sized bed and a nightstand with a simple lamp. She had already told me I could stay there as long as I needed. She helped me draft the emails for my own job, explaining that I would be taking a leave of absence for personal reasons for a few weeks. We ordered takeout, opened a bottle of wine, and talked about anything but the divorce for an hour, as if we could give the tragedy a break. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe without having to justify every decision, without fear that any desire of mine would be judged as impractical. Emily tried to call me 47 times that first day. I know because Sarah was the one who counted. She left voicemails that ranged from confusion to rage, through pleas and veiled threats. I didn't listen to a single one. Sarah did, out of professional obligation, and saved them as part of the case file. She described them to me briefly. First, a "what is happening?" Then a "how dare you?" followed by a "we can talk about this," and later a "you're going to ruin my career, think about this." The entire catalogue of someone who doesn't feel guilty for what they did, but for the consequences they now had to face. On Saturday, accompanied by Sarah and a police officer, just as a precaution in case things got out of hand, I went back to the house to get my things. The police weren't there because I feared physical violence. It was more of a neutral presence, a witness. Emily was in the living room and she looked terrible, disheveled, unkempt, her eyes red and swollen. When she saw me walk in, she shot up. "Michael, please," she began, taking a step towards me. I held up my hand. "No." She froze, breathing heavily. "Just let me explain." "Explain what?" I asked, feeling a strange calm. "That you're cheating on me, that you've been hiding money, that you told a business partner I'm a man with no ambition, useful only for the image of stability. I heard every word of that dinner, Emily. Every single one." The color drained from her face instantly, as if someone had flipped a switch. You don't speak Japanese," she stammered. "I've spoken it fluently for over a year," I replied. "Funny you never asked. You were never interested in what I did with my time while you were too busy with work, or with Paul." I said his name intentionally. I saw her chin tremble. She collapsed onto the sofa as if her legs couldn't hold her. "The company has suspended me," she said after a few seconds. "They're investigating everything, Michael. I could lose my job." "That's no longer my problem," I said, and started walking towards the stairs, towards the bedroom where I had to pack my bags. "Wait!" Her voice was desperate, almost hysterical. "We can fix this. Couples therapy, whatever. I'll end it with Paul. We can get through this. It was a mistake. I was confused. You know what the pressure is like." I turned to look at her, to really look at her, at this woman I had spent 12 years with, whom I had loved, and who I thought loved me back. "You don't want to fix this," I said slowly. "You want to fix your career, your image, your financial situation. You're not hurt that you hurt me. You're hurt that you got caught." "That's not true," she retorted, but her eyes darted for a few seconds towards the police officer, towards Sarah, as if looking for a more favorable stage. "At that dinner, You told Mr. Tanaka I was a complacent man, that you were the one in charge, that I was little more than a symbol of stability that looked good in photos. I continued, Do you even remember saying it? Her silence was answer enough. She looked down, clenching her hands on her knees. I'm done making myself small so you can feel bigger, Emily, I went on. I'm done being the convenient husband who doesn't demand too much. File all the appeals you want. Fight the divorce if you feel like it. But you're not going to win. And you're not going to get away with hiding our assets. I've seen the accounts, the emails, the apartment. You can't pretend this was a misunderstanding anymore. I saw something break in her expression. Maybe it was the moment she realized that the Michael problem had ceased to be a manageable pawn and had become an unforeseen opponent. I spent 2 hours packing, taking clothes from the closet, packing books, Japanese notebooks, my laptop, a few personal items that seemed too laden with memories to leave behind. Every item I placed in the suitcase was also a small farewell to a version of myself that no longer existed. Emily didn't try to stop me. She remained on the sofa, staring into space, occasionally running her hands through her hair, as if trying to tidy up on the outside something that was broken beyond repair on the inside. I felt broken too, I won't lie, but unlike her, I finally knew which way to walk. The divorce took 8 months to finalize. The law in our state required a 6-month waiting period from the filing of the petition, and we spent that time negotiating the settlement with lawyers, documents, hearings, and uncomfortable silences in courthouse hallways. The company's internal investigation found sufficient evidence of ethical violations. The undeclared money transfers, the use of privileged information for personal gain, the emails with Paul. They fired her. She later found another job, but in a lower position, with less pay and far less prestige. The offshore accounts had to be declared and divided. The property I didn't know existed became part of the marital assets. Sarah, with the patient efficiency that characterized her, pulled on every thread until she unraveled the web Emily had woven behind my back. There were difficult moments, of course, sessions where Emily's lawyers tried to paint me as a cold, absent man, overly focused on his career, someone who had unintentionally pushed her to seek understanding elsewhere. I listened to these narratives as one listens to a story about a vaguely familiar character, but one you don't quite recognize. I'm not perfect, I thought many times, but nothing justifies what she tried to do. At one hearing, our eyes met. There was a mix of reproach and pleading in hers, as if she still hoped that at the last moment I would back down. I didn't. In the end, I walked away with half of everything she had tried to hide, plus alimony for 3 years, while I readjusted my life and reorganized my own career under conditions that benefited me, not our image. But beyond the money, I was left with something priceless, the certainty that I had chosen to stop being a secondary character in my own story. The best part, however, something I never saw coming, happened about 2 months after starting the divorce process. One morning, while checking emails on my computer, I saw a LinkedIn notification, a new message. The sender, Mr. Tanaka. It took me a few seconds to process it. I opened the message with a racing heart. It was brief but warm. He said he had heard through third parties about my divorce and the difficult situation I was going through. He added that during the dinner he had had the impression that I understood more than I let on, and that this intuition had been confirmed upon later learning some details. They were opening an office in our country, and needed someone who understood both the Western tech and business world and Japanese business culture. My combination of experience and language proficiency, he wrote, would be invaluable. He asked if I would be willing to have coffee and discuss a potential position. I remember the exact feeling, as if someone had suddenly opened a door in a wall I believed to be solid. I met with him and his team a few weeks later in a discreetly luxurious hotel suite. This time, I spoke Japanese from the very first minute. I saw his eyes light up with genuine respect and perhaps a hint of amusement at my having fooled them all that night, pretending to be a mute guest. I knew it. He told me in Japanese at the end of the interview, when the atmosphere had relaxed. At the restaurant, when Emily was talking about you, I saw something in your eyes. I knew you understood more than it seemed. I didn't know to what extent, but I sensed it. I'm glad you found your strength. They offered me the position, Senior Director of Marketing and Business Development for the new office. The salary was triple what I was making before, but beyond the money, there was something else. Respect, autonomy, a real opportunity to build something of my own. I accepted, signed the contract, feeling like I was definitively closing one door and opening another that had been waiting for years. I ran that department for 15 years before I retired. I traveled to Japan at least a dozen times. I walked streets I had previously only seen in dramas and photographs. I ate dishes whose names I had learned in my language classes. I got lost in giant train stations and let my colleagues guide me through small bars where Japanese sounded not like an academic exercise, but like everyday music. I made real, deep friendships with people who knew me not as the husband of, but as Michael, the serious guy with an unexpected sense of humor, the one who made an effort to understand not just the language, but also the subtleties of the culture. At work, for the first time, I felt my opinion was heard for what it was worth, not for how well it fit into a picture. On a personal level, my life changed too. I moved into a simple but bright apartment where I had chosen every object myself, without negotiating with anyone. I discovered I liked to cook, that I found it relaxing to chop vegetables while listening to Japanese music or podcasts about history. I dated a few women. I had a serious 5-year relationship with a colleague from another company, a woman who had also been through a divorce, and with whom I shared many laughs and some tears. It ended amicably because our paths began to diverge, but I never shrank myself again to fit into someone else's vision of who I should be. I never again asked for permission to have hobbies or hid my interests for fear they would seem ridiculous. Emily sent me an email once, about 3 years after the divorce was finalized. It was a long message in which she told me she had remarried, had a young son, and had managed to stabilize her career at another company. She apologized for how things had ended between us and said she hoped I was doing well. She talked about mistakes of youth, about not having known how to value what we had. I read the email to the end, closed it, and never replied. Some chapters don't need an epilogue, and this was one of them. My silence was the only answer I wanted to give her. I'm 63 now. All of this happened more than 20 years ago, but I remember every detail with a clarity that sometimes surprises me. The dimly lit restaurant, the satisfied glint in Emily's eyes as she presented herself as the strategic mind, painting me as a grey man. The serene voice of Sarah on the other end of the phone. The first email from Mr. Tanaka, the first flight to Tokyo. The divorce, as painful as it was, gave me my life back. It forced me to look in the mirror and ask myself who I was without the role of husband, without the facade of a stable marriage. And against all odds, I discovered that I liked the man who emerged from that fire much more than the one who had walked into it. I still study Japanese, though now I do it purely for pleasure. I have a bookshelf full of novels, some easy, others that still make me sweat, and I enjoy finding new words that I can't quite translate. I watch movies, TV series, sometimes even the news, just to hear the cadence of the language. Occasionally I tutor young professionals who want to learn for work. They look at me with curiosity when I tell them that in my case, that language started as a secret escape and ended up being what saved me. It's living proof that I was capable of so much more than I had allowed myself to believe while I lived shrunken in a marriage where my voice barely counted. That dinner at that Japanese restaurant was simultaneously the worst and the best night of my life. The worst, because I heard truths that shattered the reality I thought was secure, because it forced me to accept that the woman I shared a bed with was not the person I thought she was. The best, because it finally pushed me to act, to stop accepting less than I deserved, to break out of the comfortable discomfort of being invisible. If you're listening to this and you're in a marriage where you feel invisible, where you're minimized, where your achievements are ridiculed or used only as decoration for someone else's life, pay attention to that feeling. It's not weakness, it's not an exaggeration, it's not ingratitude. It's your inner voice trying to warn you that something is wrong. Learn the language, whatever language you need. Maybe a literal one, like I did with Japanese. Maybe the language of the law to understand your rights. Maybe the language of finance to know what's moving around you. Maybe the language of your own self-worth so you can set boundaries without feeling guilty. Gather evidence, even if that evidence is internal at first. Moments, phrases, repeating patterns. Don't normalize what hurts you every day. Find your Sarah, that person or professional who knows how to protect you and who will calmly tell you that you're not crazy for feeling what you feel. And when you're ready, take your life back. It won't be easy, it's going to hurt. There will be nights when you question everything, when you wonder if it wouldn't have been simpler to stay where you were, just putting up with it. There will be days when fear whispers that it's better to be an accessory than to risk being alone. But on the other side of that pain, there is a life where you can be completely yourself, where your voice matters, where your decisions count, where you are not an extra in someone else's narrative, but the protagonist of your own story. A life where you can sit down, like me many years later, and tell what you went through without being ashamed of having chosen your dignity. And believe me, that life is worth fighting for. And if this story stirred something inside you, or made you think about your own life, don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, and share this video with someone who might need it. I would also love to read your opinion in the comments. What would you have done in my place? Your participation helps this message reach further than you can imagine.